Jon, welcome to the Six L's podcast. How are you?
Thanks, Mike. I'm really good, thank you. Yeah.
Good. Nice to speak to you again. Finally, face to face.
I know.
Last couple of times I've had you on the podcast, as it were, a while ago now. It's over Zoom, I think. Or
yeah, I think most of my meetings are these days.
Yeah, indeed. So, Global Managing Director at Havas Media Group. What keeps you busy on a day-to-day basis? What's the top of your agenda at the moment?
Yeah, I have the sort of nicely obtuse title of sort of head of MX development. So, classically, being in a media agency, we don't say what we do. So that is our sort of strategic and product leadership for planning and buying, effectively. So how we plan and how we buy. So my days can be completely varied. So everything from trying to help our people integrate new ways of planning. Yeah, we're talking about attention today. So how are we going to do that as an agency? What tools do we need to build? Data partnerships, for example. So working with our partners and colleagues around the world to figure that out.
Does that typically happen when like a team will come to you and say, we've got a problem, this isn't working, and then you've got to fix it? Or do you have to kind of come up with something that they don't even know that they need yet? And then or a bit of both?
It's a bit of both, really. I mean, there's stuff that we know we want to do globally because it aligns to our sort of global strategy and narrative, and we're trying to push that down to local markets. But likewise, a lot of my time is spent listening to those markets who want capability in certain areas but can't necessarily do it due to their scale, or know that they have a better chance of doing that through our sort of global partnerships, for example. So it's a bit of both. I find it works better when they're asking us, typically.
More invested.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And we spent the last 2 years kind of completely re-looking at the literally how we plan and buy media. So it's what we call MX, so our media experience organization, our platform. And that's everything from how we do intelligence work to defining strategy through to how we plan, how we buy, the tools we need to do that, the partners we need to do it, and then how we measure. So that full MX process. So we've just finished kind of writing that, a huge playbook for the network, and we've been traveling a lot to try and land that and train that in markets and get people to adopt it locally and kind of do the training locally. So everything from the tools side to the strategic side, and then, writing pitch responses or RFIs, for example. So it's a very varied role,
Well,
which is nice. But
keeps you off the streets, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what started that piece of work around MX then? What sort of led you to think that, or as a company, perhaps it wasn't your decision on your own, but what sort of led you to think, right, we need a completely new way of strategy, planning, buying?
So it predates my time at Havas. So I was previously at Dentsu and then joined Havas about 2.5 years ago, and I think for about 5 years now, it's been the meaningful media sort of story has been the Havas story and strategy. And it's one of the reasons I joined Havas, actually, because there's it's kind of gone through several iterations, that story, over that 5 years. But at the core, it was trying to get back to quality media planning that delivers great experiences for consumers. And we've evolved that story to be media that delivers for brands, for businesses, and for consumers, and ultimately will deliver attention for consumers and effectiveness and incrementality for the brands that we represent. Because you can go down a quite sort of ethical kind of rabbit hole with the idea of meaningful, but ultimately it's trying to elevate. We plan media well for in media where people actually like to see. Well, I say like to see is maybe difficult, but don't mind seeing advertising that isn't interruptive, that is maybe additive to their experiences, that will pay back for the brands. I think there's been too little focus on good media planning that really thinks about the consumers and the audiences that we're serving, in favour of heavily data-led, performance-led marketing over the last 10, 15 years. So that story really resonated with me, and we've tried to systemise that and make that real for clients. The story sounds like a good one. We'll things like attention. I was heavily involved with the attention work at Dentsu, are a big part of that. So if we're going to plan for better media experiences, media that people pay attention to in the right environments with the right context and the right content is super important.
I think you've made a point that I couldn't agree more with there around. I call it the context of the consumer. Mm-hmm. So planning meaningful media, but taking into consideration what's actually happening off the screen, not just what's happening on the screen, right?
Yeah,
and
100%.
There's so many examples of media placements, and I won't call any of them out, that are interruptive and not needed at that time and actually quite irritating, versus others that kind of feel like they're a part of the experience almost. And in fact, I will call one of them out in a good way. I had Danji from WeTransfer on a little while ago on the podcast. And actually, funnily enough, I think it was Saturday. Was it or Saturday before last? I posted on LinkedIn. I'm a customer of WeTransfer. I was transferring some files on a Saturday morning, and an Adobe ad came up. And I don't know if you're familiar with the format, but it's basically 3/4 of a page, full screen of advertising, and a little box over here, which is your files are uploading. And because it's used by creatives, Adobe was like perfectly targeted. It was a beautiful piece of interactive creative where there was a scroll bar which showed you the before and after if you use their Lightbox product, and it was happening while something else was happening, and I was waiting. So it was that little moment of downtime that no one's ever going to plan for that. The most anal planner in the world can't plan for that sudden 2 minutes that they can have doing nothing. And I think that's would that sort of fit within what you would call meaningful media? It's like the right message at the right time to the right person, and at a time when they've got the ability to pay attention.
Yeah, I mean, we call that the 3 C's. So connection, finding the right people in the right places, content, the content that we're physically serving, whether that's the creative or the content that we're serving into, and the context. So exactly to your point there, those moments where you're waiting for a download and you don't mind, it's actually something maybe entertaining for you to watch while that's happening. Yeah. So the mix of those 3 C's and trying to quantify those individually and the impact on the overall media experience that is delivering for people. So I think there's something interesting if you're a consumer. I think consumers have almost forgotten or don't understand the value exchange between advertiser and content producer and consumer anymore. If you think about TV, when there only used to be 5 commercial channels, everyone understood that you had the ad break and that paid for the content that you were seeing. So there's, I'm happy to sit through an ad break.
So just to play devil's advocate, do you believe that was what everyone thought outside of advertising?
Probably not outside of advertising, but I think there was an understanding, whether that's subconscious, that, okay, I have to sit through this ad break, but I want to watch the TV programs. So that's the trade-off that I'm having for this. And, there are always paid options, if you wanted to avoid ads, for example, or the BBC where no ads are running. But, I don't think that's the same since sort of online has been so proliferated, right? So there's lots of websites that offer you a great experience, but so many that you might go to that just stuffed with ads, or there's no value to the consumer. It's all about selling ad impressions. So I feel like as long as you're the providing good content and providing a good experience is part and parcel of what you should be doing to sell advertising, really.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you mentioned attention as a part of that, or I mentioned it as well, as a part of that meaningful media. You've been a leading voice in attention way back in your time at Dentsu and again at Havas. And I think there's probably been a dearth of agency voices, publicly at least, talking about this stuff. It seems to be a lot more vendor and ad tech led in terms of the volume of voices talking about this. And you've always sort of stood up and sort of talked about what you think from an agency point of view, which I think is fantastic. As we hurtle towards the end of Q1 in 2024, how are you thinking about attention data today? Yeah. And has that changed much since you first started looking at 2019?
2019, yeah. So 2019 was when we published a first kind of big research project with out of Dentsu with Karen Nelson-Field. I know you've spoken to on this podcast. And it was super interesting because at that time, nobody really thought about thinking about attention. It was a conversation that came up with vendors, and we were saying, look, it's just we're constantly in this place of buying low quality media, being pushed to buy that cheaper, really, really commoditized, and ultimately media and advertising getting less and less effective for brands. But all the conversations we seem to be having with brands around, can we do that cheaper? Like it's this kind of volume game for lots of impressions. But ultimately, like those impressions meant very little, and the quality of the media experience one impression can give you over another is vastly different. So the sort of quality thing is quite interesting because I think attention is almost becoming a bit more about media quality. So in the first instance, it was, well, let's understand the media that people are actually paying attention to. And those studies in 2019, 2021 with Lumen were all about how are people literally looking at ads. If the ads are being served, they might be viewable, they might be on the page, they might be all these metrics that devices can measure, but are people actually looking at them, or are they actually very good at avoiding them, which is quite often the case. And if we can measure that, what's the value of that attention? That's the critical piece. So just looking at an ad doesn't necessarily mean that you've understood it, that you've absorbed that message and that you're going to do something. So what's the sort of value of attention and the duration of attention? And weirdly, that's quite groundbreaking. It seems a bit weird, doesn't it, to go, oh, let's think about media people look at.
do you know, like I often think that if you took some of these conversations we had and you put us in like a creative agency, and they'd go, what are you talking about? Of course, attention's the most important thing. Nothing happens if attention doesn't happen. But it's not, obviously, that the new thing is that we can measure it, but not that it's important.
I mean, it's always been part of advertising literature. So I was at university. I studied advertising and marketing and the ADA models, so attention, interest, desire, action. We've always known it's important to drive.
Since the 16th century, I think we've had ADA, haven't we?
Of course. But it's kind of been forgotten about. It's one of those, I think certainly in the kind of dawn of sort of digital and online advertising, it was, well, I can put an ad in front of the right person at the point of purchase, and that's all I need to do. And where you're showing up and where people are actually looking at that has been largely forgotten. So it's a resurfacing of the importance of attention and therefore the quality of the media experience we deliver people.
So who's responsible then, in your view, for actually delivering attention? So you've got the media owner that creates the ad placement and the content around the ad placement. You've then got the creative that goes into that ad placement, and then you've got the media agency that plan which creative slot to put into which ad. If something doesn't get attention, whose fault is that?
That's a good question. It's a full ecosystem piece, really. There's no one partner. So, I guess this is one of the challenges in sort of systemizing and industrializing attention. Certainly in media buying, you'll get vendors saying, well, it's not our fault if the creative was terrible, for example, and therefore nobody looked at it. But the way that we're using attention metrics at the moment, so working with partners like Lumen and with Adelaide in the US, is to understand what is the likelihood that people will look at that ad based on purely the media placement itself. So how large it is, how many ads it's likely to be surrounded by, the domain that it sits on, placement on the page, all this kind of stuff. So all those things being true, because that's largely pretty predictable. So I think Lumen were audited by PwC last year. So they submitted themselves to audit, and they said 70% of the time those Lumen predictions on attention are right. So they're accurate. If you can predict anything right 70% of the time, you'd be a pretty well off man, right? Yeah. So it's about
100%.
You take the odds. So it's saying, regardless of creative, regardless of the person, and regardless of their relationship with that brand, on average, what's the kind of likely attention we might receive if we use that placement? And that is just being used as a way to rank and score the likely value of a media placement, which in something like TV, they're sort of relatively consistent. We've sort of understood the value of point in break, for example, for years, or center breaks versus end breaks, or 30 seconds versus 10 seconds. There's reasonably established rules and not a lot of variance. You go into sort of digital display and video, loads of things can be completely different, size and placement and clutter and everything. So it's trying to get an idea of how those things interplay to give us the likelihood that someone will pay attention to the ad. We then need to we talk about something called the attention stretch, right? So if I put it in the right place, let's take a sort of MPU on The Guardian, for example. Let's say on average that's delivering 2 seconds of attention, for example. It could get nothing, or it could get 10 seconds of attention. And the things
Karen Nelson filters is the floor and the ceiling, I think, of attention. Even if it was a blank space, it would still get 0.1 seconds, let's say, because of where it is.
Yeah, for sure, exactly. And it
could get 3 seconds if the creative was killer. So
and likewise, people understand, they know where formats are quite regularly, so they've got quite good at skipping them or avoiding them because they know an ad format is going to show up. So there's a kind of media bit which we're focused on at the moment, but then clearly it's the role of the interesting thing is can we measure those things? So could we measure the impact that the placement itself had versus the impact that the strength of the creative had, and the final one being the level of targeting we had. If you've micro targeted someone who is in market for that product at that point and is already primed to do something about that, that's very different to kind of prospecting entirely new customers. So those 3 buckets are really interesting. But right now the sort of media focus is still quite a hard job to do. But the rest of it's quite interesting. But so to your point about who's responsible, it's everyone, but I see our role as media agency is to make sure that we're giving attention the best opportunity, brands the best opportunity they have to deliver attention, and then working with creative partners. So we've done some interesting stuff with DCO, so dynamic creative optimization. So can we measure the attention that the ad first got, and then when we went through the DCO process, so we optimized for things like size of text in the ad and placement of logo and all this kind of stuff. How did that affect attention and then the final outcomes? And that's super interesting because that's small tweaks can make big differences.
Yeah. So another guest on this podcast, Rory Sutherland, said that he felt, going back a while now, he felt that the decision to separate media and creative was what he actually said. I won't say what he actually said, but it was something like totally deranged. Let's just leave the swear words out of it. Something bonkers was another thing. Do you feel today that the media planning side of the industry and the creative side of the industry work closely enough, especially when we're looking at attention as a metric? Because as you've just said there, the media placement is important, but what you put in it just determines whether, more or less, it determines on whether you're going to get 0.1 seconds, let's say, or 3 seconds. The creative is like the big driver, right? The big driver. But you're really making this really simplified. But you're basically planning which holes to put something in, and then someone else is putting something in that hole. So do you feel that there's more that we could do as an industry to work?
Yeah, far more. I mean, the number of clients we have that we have, Havas is both a creative and a media and everything in between business. But the number of clients where we hold both of that stuff for is very few in the round. But even on those ones, it's always tricky, and I think it's a missed opportunity, really. So I often see it as a great way to selling creative services. If we can, because I think the commercial aspect of it hasn't been talked about well enough. So, if we stick an average creative on this format and it drives the 2 seconds of attention, fine. But if you just spent, I don't know, let's say 10 grand or whatever it might be on DCO as an example, or creating different, like optimizing for that placement, you could double or triple the attention that got. You've tripled your media value from that one investment. So there's a sort of commercial angle there that's completely missed. We could be optimizing our placements and then thinking about the sort of effective CPMs that's driving, and that's something really interesting to be jointly measured on. It's also a good way to sell in those creative services, right? So why should a client spend 10 grand on DCA? If it can triple the effectiveness of your media investment, then fantastic. But can we demonstrate that? So there's not enough of that going on at the moment. We certainly have quite a few conversations. It's quite tricky to measure attention specific to a piece of creative at the moment, though.
Yeah.
The partners we predominantly work with will give you an average based on the placement, but it's regardless of the creative that's been served in that environment. So to be able to measure the creative impact, you're looking at spending money on either pre-copy testing, so doing something like Toby would or Realize or Lumen would. You can test the copy in advance and say, versus our bank of creatives, we see that this might perform at twice the attentive level that those would, and then you could weight your final kind of score. But it doesn't happen enough at the moment. There's extra investment required for that.
Investment and steps and time. And do you think which should come first, the media planning or the creative design?
Yeah, that's difficult. Very difficult. I mean, I think as a media planner, you would absolutely love to know what the creative was that you were dealing with. We talked earlier about the importance of things like context, and some of the early work in those attention studies showed that if you put entertaining ads, for example, on YouTube content that's sort of comedy content, the attention would be better, but also the response to the ad. So the consideration, the sentiment towards that ad would be better. So if you understood exactly what you were dealing with in terms of creative, it could really impact upon your choice of placements and formats. I think likewise, obviously advertising is there to drive a result, whether that's ROI or sales or whatever it might be, and the media plan is largely responsible for driving that. So if we're not putting it on channels that are going to pay back in the first place, then don't give me a 60-second creative.
Well, I would probably come down on the side of the media planner being the first person to be involved, and it isn't always the case. It has got better, but as you can tell from the number of grey hairs I've got, I've been in this industry for a long time. And what used to happen, it seemed, is that the creative agency would be briefed on the big idea. The creative agency would then create the big idea, and then the media planner had to try and find a way of getting that creative to fit into spaces where there might be attention. So going back to your meaningful media thing, but if that meaningful media is on X or Meta or Snapchat or TikTok or whatever it is, and you've got a 90-second cinema style advert, not that helpful.
Nope.
So for me, it's a bit of a no-brainer that the media planning should happen first. Who is the audience and where are they? And then the creative, you should say, right, this is the audience and this is where they are. Do something amazing that fills those holes in. Again, using really sort of basic language. because I mean, you went as far as to say it would be helpful to know what the creative is before you started planning, but I don't think the creative should have even been created until you know what you're planning.
Yep.
Because otherwise, it's square pegs round holes, right?
Yeah, and I think the best campaigns are exactly those where they have been discussed together. We have an multi-award winning campaign with Adidas, the liquid billboard in the Middle East. Sort of a live experiential billboard in the middle of on a beach where people are swimming. Is that a media idea or was that a creative idea first? I think the reality is it's down to the people that work on it. Did someone say we want to do a really impactful out of home ad first, or did someone say we've got this great idea to do something that can really take off and change things? It's tough. I think
so. That strengthens the argument really of having media and creative around the same table.
It does, but it doesn't
on the same brief at the same time.
When I started my career in a full service agency down in Tunbridge Wells, so it was WFCA at the time, and that was 200 people, so not a huge agency, but it was creative, it was media, production. You think, oh great, right, the perfect environment for everyone to get around the table, and no. Now in an organisation of 14,500 people, it's not hugely different, but I think you get the right groups of people together, and it is individual people as opposed to organisational structures, then it works, but happens few and far between, I think.
Right. So swerving back towards attention again, as I said, you've been a leading voice in this for a while. There's a lot of attention vendors in the market. We've mentioned some of them. You should probably throw Adelaide in there. I don't think we mentioned them yet. How do you, as an agency, that all of those vendors have got a different way of looking at attention, understanding what attention, maybe not as understanding what attention is. I think we're relatively close on understanding what attention is, I think, but although that's probably still up for debate. But they've all got a slightly different way of measuring attention, collecting data, interpreting that data, and helping brands to execute against that data. Yep. So as an agency, how do you look at that and think who should we be working with and who shouldn't we be when they've all got a slightly different approach? Yeah,
it's an interesting time. So you're right. It's completely exploded since this kind of first started, and it can be quite tough to navigate. But I kind of see two camps emerging. So I mean, one of the first things is kind of methodology, and I started out, given my involvement in the 2019 and 2021 studies, quite purist. So I felt like, and still feel to an extent, that having ground truth data based on panels that track eyeballs or whatever it's motion, whatever was key to attention. So that's where I kind of started from. Was there are multiple providers at the moment that some are using kind of eye tracking data or motion data, which I would call sort of attention based ground truth data, and some are looking at device metrics as proxies for attention. Now, I've actually come around to being, I don't think one is actually better than the other necessarily, because what they both do when you work with those partners. So we have a global relationship with Lumen, a US relationship with Adelaide, both who actually use completely opposite methodologies. What you find with both of them is that they both end up, if you're optimizing towards that or measuring that, is a better quality of media placement. So that's size and placement and viewability and all that kind of stuff. So, I've sort of softened a little bit. I was quite punchy to start with around it needs to have eye tracking data, because you said right at the beginning, the biggest differentiator between that and what's existed for 20, 25 years is looking at the person behind the screen. We've been able to understand what happens on the screen, scroll speed and clicks and all this kind of stuff for years. Hasn't really led us anywhere great. I think the way that people are now looking at those data sets and tying them to outcomes has changed quite a lot. So methodology was one. I mean, I still like and believe in the eye tracking stuff and the ground truth data, but as more and more case studies come up for the, let's call them proxies, for example, more willing to operate there.
So the probabilistic.
I guess so.
That maybe blend a little bit of page level data with maybe some attention data and come up with a best guess, basically a probabilistic idea on how much attention that's likely to get based on lots of factors. And
they are good at repeating those predictions, right? So I think the more that these vendors also submit themselves to some kind of third-party validation, like Lumen have with PwC, I think Double Verify did something similar with MRC, for example, the better. So just getting, because of the second point around running those sort of RFIs and who do you pick is transparency. These are new metrics. We want to understand how they're calculated. So what's the weight of importance you're giving to eye tracking data over device data, over the outcomes data, and how do you calculate these things? And not all of those vendors are super willing to give you that calculation. I'm not looking for the secret sauce, the kind of IP that they're sitting on, but you need to understand how that's calculated and how it's repeatable.
Yeah.
So the transparency is another thing, and it kind of depends on what we're trying to do. So what we've been doing at Havas is it's not just a measurement play. So this is far from just a measurement play and replacing things like viewability, for example. We want that data for planning. So to start understanding the relationship between reach and frequency and attention, for example, across media. So why something like cinema has always suffered when you're doing reach-based planning, because if you're spending a lot of money anyway, cinema doesn't add a lot of incremental reach, but we've always known it's super impactful, but it's always struggled to stay on a plan for those reasons when you're just looking at reach. When you start looking at attention or something, for example, that's a massive shift.
King of attention,
100%, yeah. So it's a way of resurfacing the importance of the quality of that exposure in planning, and that's.
I think Karen Stacey would never forgive me if I didn't take this opportunity to say you should start with cinema and then go for the frequency.
I mean, I love cinema; it's one of the best media experiences out there. Yeah, I agree. But have been on the other end of it when been told to take it off the plan because the CPMs look too high, or it was always. I say difficult to defend. It shouldn't be, because it's fantastic.
Just on that point, actually, and I think there's digital. Whatever digital means anymore. So there's mobile gaming experiences that deliver really, really high attention with video as well. But let's take that broad set and TV. Let's take those three environments. Surely, if you're running a video campaign, let's say, and you do cinema, TV, so cinema gives you your impact, you're in a dark room, phone's off and all the rest of it. And then TV gives you your reach, slightly less attention, but more attention than a lot of digital. And then mobile gives you reach again and frequency. And then you're then going to run it across the open web with video. And we know that if we look at that Lumen chart they did with T-Vision, if you can remember the one I'm talking about, cinema's up on the top left and it's very high, and it kind of goes down pretty quickly as you go across the channels, right? So we know that the general attention that you're likely to get from an average, I think the IAB standard formats is 1.2 seconds, something like that. So we know that it's fleeting. If you start with big impact, sight, sound, motion, all of the rest of it, doesn't that make the rest of it work that much harder? So you might only need to see a couple of seconds of another video at another time because you've seen it so many times in its entirety.
Yeah, I mean, arguably, and that's the kind of the argument thinking about the content that you're placing in these environments. If you've already done that and someone's been exposed to that high impact format previously in your plan, then you can start serving cut downs and everything else in the kind of digital media stuff. But the most important question, which is the biggest probably sticking point for adoption, but it's not unsolvable by any means, but it's the big missing link, is how much attention do I need? And that's a big one. It's, for a brand like, let's say, Coca-Cola, who everyone intrinsically knows, and you can just show them a Coca-Cola can, and that does the job of, keeping them relevant and top of mind, for example.
Especially if it's got condensation running down the side on a hot day, you're done. Right? Half a second, I'm in.
Yeah. I mean, I had this debate, I would say, with Byron Sharper last year, I think, on LinkedIn slightly publicly, which wasn't ideal. But we were saying the same thing, really, in effect, just in the wrong way, which is I know I want my brands to have some attention. And at the moment, the way we're using attention data is to avoid inattention. So first and foremost, I want to avoid all the formats and placements that deliver nothing and that are wasting media budget, because that is a pure efficiency saving. But then I need to do the work to understand how much attention I need to deliver the outcome the brand wants, and that is completely dependent on the brand, the product, how
much mental availability it has already.
Exactly. The current mental availability, and that's hard to get to, because for each of those brands, you need to do an analysis of, let's measure attention everywhere. Let's measure effectively across the KPI funnel. Let's say everything from brand recall and consideration down to sales and ROI. What was the relationship between attention and those things, and how much do I need? And that's the work that needs to be done, but it's very hard to do because it's not right for all brands to be on TV, for example, if they don't need it. And it could be fine for fleeting attention, but for others, it's who nobody knows, and they've got a complicated story, very, very different. So that's the biggest missing link, and I think everyone wants a silver bullet. It doesn't exist.
No, so I feel like we'll get there fairly quickly in terms of a framework that if the brand's completely unknown in a category that's shopped infrequently, it probably needs this much attention. I think it'll be a generalization, but I think we'll get to that, right?
So that's sort of what Adelaide
might need half a second.
So Adelaide do effectively that. So they have a lot of outcomes data, and they can effectively say to you, right, if you're in this category and this is your goal at this time, for example, this is your sort of range of AUs, so their attention units are AUs, that you should be trading, and therefore go buy those, which is directional and great. But ultimately, what brands need to do is to replace that sort of norms data with their own data, so you can start to get to a more customized model, because it's completely different for every brand, right, based on their creative or mental availability. So it's a good start, but brands need to be thinking about how you bring those two things together.
Yeah, and it also it comes back to, I think, how much attention do I need? It comes back yet again to the creative, because if you've got an amazing, let's take Red Bull. Red Bull gives you wings, right? It's within half a second you could probably glance at that, and because the mental availability is high, because of the iconography of the cartoon type characters and the style and the colours and the headline of Red Bull gives you wings, you could probably take that in less than a second, and it will do everything it needed to do. It's just reminding you about Red Bull.
Yep.
But a lot of that, I would argue, is the creative that's done that. I mean, and obviously the amount of time,
and a huge history
and billions of pounds of advertising, of course. But the creative message has got to be key, right? It's got to be able to deliver something. So I had this conversation with, you mentioned earlier that Karen Nelson-Field was on the podcast, and we were talking about when we measure video advertising, we know that it's a 10-second ad, or it's a 20-second ad, or it's a 30-second ad, because that's how long it takes to play from start to finish. But when we look at an MPU ad, we don't think, how long does it take to take that message in? We don't think of it as a 3-second MPU or a 2-second MPU.
Yeah.
And maybe we should, because if we can then start telling creative agents, I'm not telling you how to do your job, by the way, it's just an idea. But if we could tell a creative agency, in order to reach that audience, the majority of the media we would want to buy will deliver an average of 2 seconds. So can you make an ad that can be delivered in 2 seconds? I think we start to get quite interesting.
You're right. It should be that it's ground truth reality. No matter how we want a media placement to perform, there is a reality of how humans are going to view that. And if on average, let's say a display ad in the feed on social is only 1.5 seconds, that's what we need to be designing for. We can aim to stretch it. Yeah, we talked about the stretch earlier. We might get to 5 seconds. We might get to whatever, but we need to. Those realities need to be kind of common knowledge when we're designing.
So does it make the floor and the ceiling of attention more interesting than the average then?
Yeah, I think so. That's something we're pushing for at the moment. So we have the averages across, I think it's about 40,000 domains globally. So we built a tool, our MMP planner tool, that ranks and scores. It's about 40,000 domains at a format and placement level. And that's great because you can build some marketplaces off of that. We can trade, we want high attention domains, but you need that floor and the ceiling as well, really, to help brands understand the value of investing in targeting and data and creative to stretch it, because it's kind of value that's left on the table otherwise. If you're just working to averages, then we could be tripling the attention from a plan.
And also, if this format has never ever got any more than 4 seconds of attention, we shouldn't probably be arrogant enough to think we're going to get 6.
You try, but I mean, it's really dull, isn't it? A media person put the logo up front, for example, but if your reality is 1.5 seconds on average, that's what we do, right? If you're you put anything in there, put the sweaty Coca-Cola can on there, right?
100%. So I wanted to move to switch gears to a slightly different topic. My previous guest was Nick Ashley from Tesco Media, talking about retail media, which is another hugely talked about topic in our industry at the moment.
Yep.
I'd love to get a sense of how big it is today, because if you were to believe, based on how often it's talked about and how many column inches it gets, you'd probably think it's the biggest thing since sliced bread. And maybe it is, but sliced bread, that kind of works, doesn't it, with retail media? Anyway, sorry, I'm a hero week. How big is it today, would you say, in terms of the brands that maybe you work with or that maybe wider than the Havas set of clients? How many are actually actively using retail media today, and what sort of percentage of their budget roughly would you say is it quite a small number, a small budget? Sorry, I'm going to stop.
That's right.
I think you understand the question.
So we have a dedicated business unit now at Havas for e-commerce, so Havas Market. They published a paper in December last year, actually, with lots of these kind of stats. I always get a sense of how important or something is from the RFIs and pitch questions I receive from brands, and it's in every single one.
Right.
You know, the e-com retail media is a key question lots of brands have right now, and you can totally understand why. Right, not only is it a really interesting performance channel for them to be, you know, effectively digital point of sale.
Yeah.
Or like you've been in supermarkets, but also a chance to monetize their own platforms and data. So it's understandable why it's so important. I think the growth, so the European growth in retail media spend was 3 times greater than digital spend average last year. So I think it was in the UK, digital media was 11% growth and retail media was 30% growth. So like a huge amount of growth, certainly. And this year, I think the IAB are predicting that to jump to about 40%. So retail media spend is growing quite a lot. I think on average, we measured about 10% of clients' digital media budgets are going towards retail media, but that can go up to about 30% for those heavier investors. You know, if you're FMCG or have your own e-com offering, that's quite a lot larger. So I do think spend is flowing that way. There's definitely a lot of conversation about it. It's easy to see why. I mean, I'm interested where the money comes from, right? Like, what does that cannibalize? And it's probably sort of performance-based programmatic display video, because you're going from a hopeful to push this through to retail to being right at the pointy end of purchase and pushing someone over that line. Or, you know, it's it's quite interesting. You said you had Rory Sutherland on. I saw him shopping in Sainsbury's because we live in the same town. I was like, oh, how does he look at a shelf of products and decide what to buy? You know, it's a king of advertising, and you know, it's that, you know, everyone's a brand loyalist until there's a bog off, right?
Imagine Rory Sutherland shopping.
I know, yeah, it was quite fascinating. I was sort of like, I was too starstruck. No, I was too starstruck. I couldn't get near him. But it was fascinating. Yeah, so everyone's a brand loyalist until there's a bog off, right? And if that's the opportunity for brands in retail media to elevate their products at the point of purchase, it's super interesting, particularly with the ability to put product reviews in those placements and give the confidence to consumers to buy stuff. It's a super interesting area. But yeah, I do feel like the hype is being backed up by spend and certainly interest. I say every RFI or pitch kind of conversation we're having will incorporate some question about retail media. Yeah. Okay,
so there. It feels to me that there's some people out there in our industry that feel that this is a threat, perhaps, to the open web, and others, and I think I'm more in the latter camp, that think that it could be an amazing opportunity. So with tracking going away generally across the board, a lot of publishers' inventory becomes non-addressable. And it feels to me that retail media. So in fact, Nick said that. So Nick from Tesco, as I say, he was the previous guest, and he was saying that if you're only thinking about it as the bottom of the funnel, kind of trying to convert somebody in store or whatever, you're really missing a trick. And I definitely agree with him, because if you think of Tesco as an example, they've got 21 million households that they've got data on,
huge,
and know everything that's been bought by those households and where those households are in relation to stores. And then if you take an omni-channel DSP, they can then tell you what media placements are around where those people live, and you've got the sort of, I mean, this is the thing that I thought was really exciting for CMOs. They've been fighting for budget to get brand signed off, but because it doesn't convert quickly, it's not. Let's put it into performance, because then we can see an immediate return on investment. But imagine this scenario where you've got 10 million households that you're going to target with brand advertising for 2 months, and 10 million that you're not, and then you're going to target all 20 million with a direct response ad and see what the difference is.
Amazing for testing, amazing for it's
and proving the value of brand. Just could be incredible, couldn't it?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's more of an opportunity than it is anything else, and you've clearly got walled gardens with their own data sets that will most likely stay that way. Although, we, as agencies, we're partnering with those walled gardens to create opportunities for brands, whether that's through kind of audits of their kind of e-com setup, so where their products are being placed, and product imagery, so to give we're doing a sort of market audit, as it were. But I think the opportunities are for those kind of retail media or e-com sites to create their own networks and data solutions, right? So data offering, which is interesting, right? They've got, Nick at Dunnhumby's got an unparalleled data set for shopper data, that as of Nectar, for example, to be able to, and that's always been viable. We can buy that in programmatic media, but to your point, to be able to activate that and test that at the point of purchase or in store environments is
and then
super
measure how much was sold as a result.
Yeah, and track that through to footfall as well in store. So the idea of sort of omnichannel retail is something we're talking about quite a lot at the moment. Like, what's the impact of all of these things together on the total shopper experience? So, and being able to track that through the process is amazing.
But it's beyond it's in store, and then did they buy in store? So it's that closed loop, as they call it, like which if you can prove that we serve branding to these people and 10% of them bought the product, and we didn't serve branding to these people and 5% bought the product, and the difference is 200 grand's worth of stuff, then okay, right, we can start to see the power of brand. So do you, I know it's not your sort of specialist subject, like, or your area of interest, but is there like a Havas strategy around how you help brands with this, or is it very different from brand to brand? Or?
Yeah, we sort of reacted, I think, quite quickly to the sort of trend or the emerging trend. So it's 2 years ago now, we formed Havas Market, so one specialised business unit, which is now I can't remember how many markets around the world, but a lot of our markets around the world. So, agencies are amazing places. We have specialists in terms of people all over the place. When something like this comes around, we need to form a proper business unit around this and have an offering. So Havas Market now is everything from being able to help clients audit their own kind of e-com platforms and understand how to monetize them better, helping them understand how to show up better across the e-com platforms that they're working with, so Amazon and all those guys, and social commerce, for example. And then the final element of how do we buy retail media? So it's an all-in-one shop for retail and e-commerce stuff. I think that's the interesting thing about agencies. You can pull the right people together and formulate something completely new. So these people yesterday were social media specialists, or dealing with social commerce, or programmatic specialists with an interest in retail media. They're now working in a dedicated business unit for this. So it was a quick reaction to it, but something I think our growth in Havas Market last year was about 35%. So in terms of revenues, which is quite impressive in 1 year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the arguments against in-housing, isn't it? Is that it's very difficult for a brand to have all of the right people in-house and give them a job. Like you don't necessarily need a full-time programmatic expert, and even if you did and you got one, there's nowhere for them to go. That you can't promote them because their job is going to be the same this year, next year, the year after, which means that potentially the individual in the job is going to get stale and frustrated because there's no promotion or anything available to them, but also they're going to get quite bored maybe, and they're going to want to move on, and then you're going to have to go through that whole hiring process again. Whereas in the agency environment, as you just touched upon there, you've got lots of people coming in at grad level, AE, AM, AD, and so there's a progression, and then you can go, actually, I've spent 2 years on that brand, I'm going to go and work on that brand. So you get a bit of CPG with a bit of automotive or whatever. So you start to get a bit more of a more rounded view of the market. Yeah,
career paths at agencies are interesting. I've gone from, I was a creative suit when I first started, then a TV buyer, then a TV buyer for quite a while, then a group director, headed up product, then moved into a global role and started doing like research programs. So you get to your point, you get to experience lots of different kind of specialisms and interesting things. I think that's what the sort of draw of working in agency is. And even if it's just working on different brands, different clients, if you've worked on the same client or same brand for 5 years, some people love that and they love the consistency and the depth of knowledge they have around that. Others want to move on to something else and do something different and interesting. So I think the in-housing piece is interesting, and I think there's only a handful of businesses that can do that well. If you're a big portfolio business and you operate across tons of brands as it is, then it makes perfect sense. But I also can't understand the economies of scale that come with some of the in-housing conversations. When I was a TV buyer, I'd be buying across 5 different clients, on 30 grand a year or something, right? So you'd be working across all sorts of different things. But
I was speaking to a senior marketing friend of mine who works for a big brand based on a trading estate and out in the burbs, and she was like, how are we going to attract the top talent to come here? It was like, I don't want to say where it is because it might sort of narrow it down a little bit, but imagine the office, right? Like that Slough trading estate. It was like they worked there, and that's fine for them to have an office and do their thing, but getting the top London talent and the sort of the inquisitive minds and the talent of the future to come all the way out to a trading estate there and then do the same thing day in, day out, is going to, in her view, recruitment was the hardest. It was the hardest bit and the bit that would make it not work the most, if that makes sense.
I think, to be honest, though, like, now's possibly the bigger opportunity for that than ever, right? Post COVID, with people going in 2 to 3 days a week to the office in London. Lots of people were looking for more working at home or working locally to where they live, and possibly moving out of London, for example. I think there's probably more opportunity for that now than there's ever has been. But I still think people want that, kind of diversity of the work that they're doing. That career path through the agency is super interesting. But yeah, it's fascinating. We get people now coming in that, at grad level, that want to do e-com and retail media. They've grown up in the space of social commerce, so TikTok and selling, being TikTok sold it to me kind of mentality, and that's the area they're fascinated in. So it's it's certainly not a small area anymore. It's one people genuinely want to come and do because they know it. That new generation.
Yeah, cool. So final question. This is a little treat for those that have stayed until the end. Well, it's a treat if you sell media. There's been a lot of change it's fair to say, in the media seller and media buyer relationship over the years that I've been in it. I don't want to sound like the old fart, but there has. I mean, it was a very relationship business. It was, and maybe I've worked on some big brands, so maybe I've been lucky and maybe I've got a slightly skewed version of it. But I think it was easier in, I was going to say the old days then, I'm really dating myself. But it's hard for some brands that are not perhaps the big brands that we've mentioned today to get attention from agencies in sufficient quantity or indeed quality to be able to sort of break through. So it's clearly evident why that's a problem for the media seller or ad tech vendor or whoever it might be. But it's potentially a problem for the agency as well, right? Because if you're only ever dealing with the companies that then what happens if the next Meta comes along, but we don't, eventually it'll balloon and then you'll obviously take the meeting. But I guess my question to you is, what one piece of advice would you give to a media seller or an ad tech vendor that's perhaps struggling to get enough attention from agencies? Yeah,
it is tough. I think you have to think about how agencies are evolving and developing. So what we do now is far more diverse than what it ever used to be. So we're not, we used to be just planning and buying shops. We're now data and technology businesses, consultants, e-com and retail media specialists. We have lots of different services that we're offering to clients, and there's an interesting clash at the moment. We're often measured on the media buying piece, so how cheaply we can buy media, whether that's by auditors or by clients, but clients are asking us to do all of this other stuff, right? So the services that we offer aren't the things we're necessarily measured on all the time. So as a kind of media owner, it's getting a full understanding of what that agency offering is and how you can help us develop those services for clients and brands. I think all too often you get lots of emails every day, and I do my very best to try and respond to everyone as much as I can, at least point them in the right direction. But they're all about, here's what we sell, not here's what we think we could do for you in terms of enhancing your, let's say it's Havas Market, like what capability do we believe we could add to Havas Market that you could then go and offer to your clients, or here's how we think we could offer you attention data, for example, to empower your planning tools. All the conversation I've had with those vendors is about how do we build as Havas new tools and solutions for clients, and then obviously having a commercial relationship with them on spend from clients if clients want to do that. But I don't think enough of those conversations are geared towards, here's how we think we can help you develop something that the other agencies don't have, or some kind of secret sauce, because that's what we are now. Agencies are a collection of people, increasingly our technology and our data offering, and then commercials. So it's got to be something that enhances those things, and it's not easy because they're, once you're in bed with let's say a data provider that's powering our Converge platform, for example, really hard to unseat that. So how do you augment that, or what can you additionally bring to it? It's a very different, if it's how do we just get some tests up and running with X client, that's a really tough thing to do quite often, because that's, either we're building our own stuff to try and deliver for clients, or they're already working with multiple partners. But
do you find a lot of the messaging that you receive is, this is what we do, this is what I want?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot.
Yeah.
Great.
So at Six Sales, we work with a lot of people on the sales side, and what we find, if we look across all of the clients that we work with and all of the messaging that we help them to produce, we find that the clients that are able to really specifically hone in on a particular problem that the client might have, and then work back to what they do, rather than just lead with, this is what we do. Do you want some? Should we run a test?
Yeah.
I think that tends to work. So I think that's what you're alluding to there. I just want to clarify that. But so if somebody were to come to you and say, are you finding this a problem? Because they know that is a problem in the agency world. And do you find it's a problem because of these reasons? We've got something that might be able to help you solve that problem, which will also feed into your planning tools, and it'll help you with client stuff. Is that the sort of thing? Is that the sort of messaging that's more likely to
I think so.
response?
And it's like sort of do the research. I mean, I think it's slightly frustrating when you get an email. It's like, we think we can help your clients. It's like, which ones? Like we've got lots. So the more specific that messaging is, or I've spoken to this person and they've identified that this might be a problem for this. That's a really good warm intro. Then you go, right, okay, I know where to direct you and what conversation we can have. Because quite often, certainly in my kind of role at the level that is, I'm just helping direct those conversations to the right people and open the doors. As long as I know who to direct that to and what it might do for them, then that's really great. Everyone's so busy, you never want to go, can you just talk to this person? It needs to be specifically, they've identified this, they've spoken to this person, if they've got some insight from the client or whatever, then fantastic. But I know it's hard to get. But.
This won't be the first time you've heard this complaint, I'm sure, but it's quite difficult as well. I haven't been agency facing for ages, but I believe that the problem still exists. The organograms are basically as rare as hen's teeth, and trying to figure out who you need to speak to about what from the outside is often quite problematic. I did a piece of consulting work for a big telecommunications company a couple of years ago, and they basically asked me to map out who deals with what in the media agency world, and oh my goodness, it was difficult. It was so difficult. I had to call on every person that I know, and even people within the agency didn't know. It wasn't like, oh, you get hold of someone in the agency and they'll be able to help you, because they're like, I don't know who works on that. So
they change so often. They change so regularly, right? I mean, you think about the level of churn in agencies. I mean, ours is pretty low. I think it's about sort of 20 to 25% or something. But on average, I think it's about 40, the level of churn. So the people that were in the business on those client teams have gone or have moved. Keeping those up to date is definitely quite hard work. I often think some of it is trying to just, with all the best.
You don't want to invite spam.
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot going on. Everyone's got a lot going on. So unless you feel like it's really valuable, you don't want to just palm a conversation off onto someone. So I think the obfuscation can be quite useful, but I don't think it's by design. It's generally the amount of moving around that happens and churn that goes on in those businesses can be tough. But I think most people would try and direct people to the right person, but it depends how well connected they are within a network. I mean, it's my job to be connected inside of Havas to the right people. But lots of people just work in their business unit and in their team and don't really know many people outside of that. So it's if you're speaking to them, they may genuinely not know.
So just to sort of summarize that advice, then I think you're saying do some research on some of the problems and challenges that you might be facing. Explain how somebody else has solved that problem, perhaps using the tech or the media or whatever, and could we have a conversation about how it might be able to help you do the same?
Yep, I think that's good start.
Yeah, cool. Jon, interesting as always. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being on the Six Sales podcast.
Thanks, Mike. Cheers. Thanks.